There we go. All right, so welcome to the first webinar, which is the administration of coaching. So for many of you, actually, I haven't had the chance yet to meet you. So it's very nice to electronically meet you on our first webinar. My name's Natasha Burgess-Johnson. I'm the coaching lead within the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic, based in Halifax. As part of that role, I'm also the Atlantic Coaching Diploma, or the Advanced Coaching Diploma, sorry, Atlantic Director. We have a new group coming in, and we just have a current group graduating. So that's exciting. Some brief background of myself. I went to Dalhousie here in Halifax. I did do the Advanced Coaching Diploma myself. It was a great program. Spent 10 years as a professional sports administrator, which is what this topic tonight is going to be about. And then my sport background is in snowboard coaching. So I've coached many different sports, but my main one where I focused my professional time was as a snowboard coach. So what we're going to talk about tonight is some of the subjects. These all came from the Atlantic Coaching Conference this year. So for those of you that were in attendance in April, we had our feedback session with Tim Mary one of the nights, and we asked for feedback on areas that coaches needed more support. One of those areas that came up was in sports administration and the business aspects of coaching, and that feedback directly came back to these webinars. So we said, great, that's a subject that we can talk online, and let's have that conversation when our coaches are available and when we can have this interaction. So that's where these came from. Like I said, it's going to be the two parts. So in January, we'll get kind of the sponsorship marketing side of things. What I'm going to cover tonight is what my background is, which is really the sport admin side of coaching. So what is the coach's role in administration? We all know, if you've been coaching for a while, how much administration is required. Some of the key things that have come out of doing this is communication. We're going to talk about budgeting and finances, athlete tracking, management of teams, and mostly management of your greater support team, policies and procedures, and then insurance and sanctioning. So that's quite a few things. So each one we're just going to touch on briefly, and then what I'm hoping is you guys can fire out some questions as you have them. So just to sort of start and kind of frame tonight. So what is administration as far as the definition that we're going to be utilizing tonight? So in the coaching world, it can encompass any aspect needed to run a regular business. So many of us don't always think that each of us as coaches, and all of us running programs, and definitely those that are operating or operating within a club, all of those things really run as mini businesses. So coaches have to wear many hats, and we have to do all of the aspects needed to run a regular business outside of sport. On top of that, there's often an extra demand because of the world of coaching. So we also, on top of what's needed to run a business, we have athlete tracking because it's a results-driven world. So this can be as simple for many of you in your sports as tracking numbers and plays, or as complicated as managing large program budgets. And I did look through the list. I don't know all of you, unfortunately, but the aim of these webinars is we are going to be hopefully having club coaches from all around Atlantic Canada attend, as well as provincial coaches. I know we have some of our professional coaches online right now that I can see, and some of our provincial coaches that I know from Nova Scotia. So when I'm talking through some of these things, we are trying to hit all these audiences through these webinars and open them up to everyone. So if you have a specific question, or if you can't see where you fit in what I'm talking about, just ask. But I will be kind of speaking to both the professional side of coaching and club coaching and working within a club. So I can also share these slides with you afterwards if you would like them. So you definitely don't have to jot anything down on this. But this is just a look at the coach's role in administration. So if you look at what a typical administrator would be this is within sport and can be also kind of put onto any nonprofit group, and a lot of businesses the same thing. But that administrator or that executive director or whatever the main administrator within the association is called has to do all these things in the left column. What I want you to notice is that in the right, a coach in a program, or coach of a team has to do as much administration as the person in the association administrators in many, many ways. So basically, we can't get away from it as coaches, which is why we need more information on it. And many of us need to get stronger in this area. So within a coach's role, and especially nowadays as coaching becomes more professionalized, they're the communicator to the athletes, the parents. The IST, for those of you that don't know, IST is referred to few times in this slideshow, and that's integrated support team. So your sports science staff or whoever you have as part of your support team. Budget and tracking team finances and travel events is a big part of coaching. Tracking that athlete performance and progression, like we said. Ensuring team or staff are insured and sanctioned, which is an area I know a lot of coaches sometimes shy away from. Managing those other coaches, your team, your parents, your athletes. There's so much person management as a coach. Oftentimes, the coach is the person creating and implementing team policies, especially within smaller clubs or smaller provincial sport organizations, and then coming up with a plan that's well communicated. So us as coaches still have to do a whole lot of administration. So what I want to start with here is just a little bit of communication. So we all know that communication is important as a coach. And what I want to go through is sort of the key people that we have as coaches have to communicate with. And then I'm just going to clear the chat box. We're going to make this a little bit interactive with your fingers anyway. And I want to go through what you guys think the best way or some great ways to communicate with all these different groups. So we're going to talk about the different ways that communication happens within sport and within our role as a coach. So what do you guys think is an effective way to communicate with the parents? Face-to-face, yeah, definitely. Awesome. Cool. So a whole bunch right off the bat, face-to-face, perfect. For parents, awesome, good. So great, we have good answers there. So face to face, yeah, with parents, they often appreciate it and they understand it. What are some other great ways with parents that you guys as coaches have seen that you feel is pretty well received? Phone, yep, totally. Social media, I like that one, Miranda. That's great. Miranda, what sport are you with? Swimming, awesome. Okay. So social media can use swimming can use social media with their parents. That's great. Email, website, and social media. Yeah, great. Email, Team Snap. Team Snap, nice. That's starting to get used more and more, Daniel. So that's awesome. Yeah, so those are all great. So in my experience, the main ones tend to be face to face, which you guys said. Phone is great with parents, and then email is still such a key thing with a lot of parents. But I like some of the comments like Team Snap and social media. I think we're starting to get there with parents, and especially depending on the parent age group too. Maybe that's a thing. Athletes, what do you guys find? This is a great discussion to have amongst a group of coaches. What are you finding that's most successful with athletes? You could even add what age your athletes are too, if that helps. I know for me, my experience, I normally worked with pre-junior worlds or junior worlds age athletes, so mine were always about 15 to 21. Face to face, yep, awesome. Bulletin boards, nice. Team meetings, yep, face to face. What do you guys like about face to face with athletes? Got lots of awesome typers. Yeah, Shannon, awesome, great. So Shannon said you can see their reaction to the conversation. Twitter, excellent, Christopher. That's a new one. Not a new one, but one I hadn't heard come up when talking about this in other presentations. That's a really good one. Yep. So definitely with athletes, face to face, really great. We're seeing more and more social media used with athlete interaction, and I think it's very effective. And there's so many different platforms coming up. So I like Twitter's one option. Another one I know one of our teams uses here is Snapchat. So they've started using Snapchat with their team, and they find that quite successful. I've seen Facebook groups used for Canada Games teams quite successful as well. They each kind of have their advantages. Um, Less miscommunication when face to face. Mike says, "Yep, definitely." The other thing that I like with face to face with young athletes is you know that they're listening and that they've actually gotten the message. So even with Facebook, if you're using it, you can track who's seen it, but you don't know that they've actually gotten the message. And it is nice in a team meeting or in a face-to-face environment. You know that you can make eye contact and know that they've understood it. Awesome. So the big key there is that pretty much none of you said phone or email, which is exactly what I wanted to highlight. So communication with athletes definitely differs from parents, and I'm sure most of you have seen that. And for any of the newer coaches, this is great dialogue going on in the chat to kind of help you with what is most effective. And there's a lot of experience on this call, so that's great. I think integrated support staff and assistant or head coaches, we can kind of roll together. So what do you guys see as kind of the most effective means of communicating with those people within your experience? Team meetings, yeah, team meetings. Email, yep, totally, Kathy. So email to those very similar to parents. And actually, we can roll association into this. It's really that support team staff, head coaches, assistant coaches, and association. Email and face to face. Awesome. Perfect. Yeah, great. Also, things that we're on like this Adobe Connect, we're starting to do more of with this type of thing. So with IST team staff, we are starting to use more, Skype or things like that because your team may not all be located in one place. Like you might have a coach an hour away, or your sports psych might be located an hour outside of where you are. So utilizing more of this technology is going to help us with this communication going forward. Awesome. You guys did great great chat going on in the chat. So basically all I wanted to highlight with this is the amount of communication that we have to do as coaches. There's so many different groups that we have to communicate with. And then as you guys have outlined into the chat, there's so many different ways that communication can happen. So we have a lot going on. And for any of the newer coaches that we do have on the call, the key point is really that there's a ton of communication that needs to happen. It's harder to over communicate than it is to under communicate. Many of our coaches don't share as much as they really should. So we're going to dive right into some fun stuff. So this is meant to be very small. You're not meant to actually have to see any of the numbers on this. So this is just a quick snapshot of finances. And we're not going to get into a ton in this area. I'm going to go through the next couple slides quickly on putting together a budget, but this was basically just more of a statement, I guess, on practicing finances and the fact that what we're seeing within coaching right now, the trend is that coaches are now really responsible to the parents, the board, and the association for a lot of management of funds, and all funds must be accounted for from trips. And inaccurate or insufficient fund tracking is not appropriate within coaching. Not that it ever was, but it's more so now, very, very much professionalized, and we need to see that we're strong in this area. So this was just an example of one single trip, and all of the different, description outlines all of the different areas, and then you're looking at multi-athlete trips. And for any of you, this was an individual sport with a large team. For any of you that are involved in team sport, I can only imagine the size of the spreadsheet if you were to take like a hockey team on a trip, and you're charging back individual amounts to of each athlete. Like this would just get very, very large. So as a coach, what can we do to improve this area? Well, we can practice. We can reach out to other coaches, like in this group here. We have lots of experience. Reach out to those people. Reach into the business world. So a lot of our coaches in other provinces are able to make connections. There's formal programs to make connections with business mentors. But I think in Atlantic Canada, it's something that we can do on our own, and it's something that would be so valuable is find a business mentor in your community that's willing to put in a little bit of time with a coach and help you with finance tracking if it's an area that you find yourself struggling with. Also, all of our associations, any association that you're involved in, should have a treasurer. If that person is a great treasurer and you feel comfortable with them, that would be a great mentor for you as well. Oh, that slide came up a little funny. Sorry, guys. The budgeting's kind of hidden. So one of the areas that was asked from the coaching conference was to talk a little bit on budgeting. So again, it's hard to know, like even this group on here, you guys can type in if you have any questions after I go through it, but I don't know what the group's questions were. So I'll just give a little bit of background information. So um, in general in budgeting, so this was a very simple form that anyone can use if you're putting together your first budget. And whether this was for a program. So I pulled out the items, but you would put in your own items. But this was for a fairly large program, but it could be used. It's the same one that I used for teams, a little different than a team trip. This is really for a larger program type budget. Looks exactly the same as the association budgets that we work with, the same as even the provincial level association budgets. And this was actually pulled from my national programming. So it can be used in the template works for most things. So how you start off is just projected expenses. So that first column there is listing everything all the items that you think you're going to have in your budget, and then what you think they might cost. Projected revenue, so hopefully what you're bringing in. The net is I don't know your experience on this call, so you can stop me if needed. But so the net is the difference, and in this version here, the brackets it represents a negative number. So that first line would be negative $1,000. It's a projected um, uh, net from that first expense line. And then ensuring that you're tracking the actuals, which is really the most important thing after this budget is set. So the next three columns are what actually happened throughout the season or throughout the program. So the actual expense for that top one was higher than expected. The actual revenue, for example, came in at 0. So therefore the profit or loss was much bigger than expected. So having you look at the big picture after you input everything that you think you're going to have during the season and what that'll be, looking at the bottom and making sure that it's going to be a positive number or a net zero number. You can see this was pulled out of a program that I was working on that wasn't quite completed yet. So you can see on the bottom profit loss, it would show this program took a big loss, but this was actually just a couple weeks into the program. So generally, you'd want that bottom number to either be positive or 0 would be good too. So what are some kind of just general budgeting basics when you're putting something together for your team or your program or your club or whatever it is, or your provincial association if you're at that level? Start with adding as many items as possible and reduce as you learn more. And what I mean by that is it's better to have more areas, more buckets down in your initial budget, and then you can consolidate them later. So I've worked with some PSOs that tried to put two big pots in place. And then what happens is you have, say, a coaching pot. So you say, okay, my budget line is going to be coach development. But then you have people go on conferences, and then you have individuals, and it gets very confusing, and you can really quickly lose what was in that budget and where did the money go and what do I budget for next year because I don't know what's happening. So what I always suggest is put as many items in as you can so that it's more clear, and then maybe you can consolidate the following year. So maybe instead you have coach development, then you list all your key coaches and you can put their professional development there, and then you could list specific conferences. So maybe Coaching with an Edge, we're going to budget this much money. Our own sports specific conference, we're going to budget this much money. Then you can really look at it and break it down. Practicing projected expenses. So this one takes practice. So you can't, decide to budget for your program tomorrow and think that you're going to accurately guess all of your expenses, unless you've been doing it a really long time and you just haven't written it down. And you just intuitively know the costs of things. But when working with new coaches in our programs, I know they always struggle with, well, how do you know how much something will cost? And it's true, it's a little bit of the art side of things, but in a lot of ways it's also not, because it's about research. So especially budgeting things like trips, doing your research. So Googling, airline, like hotels, all of that stuff is easily accessible now. And then as long as you have thought out as much as you could about the trip or the program ahead of time, and thought out things like extra expenses that you could entail, then your projected expenses, will get closer and closer as you do better research on what could happen or what could be included in that budget. Um, and then year over year, your projections get more and more accurate. So you start to notice that if you budget for a trip to one location this year and you do either that same trip or a similar trip the following year, you really start to be able to tighten up those budgets. So I've been coaching a provincial team here for 12 years. I can now quite accurately project an expense for pretty much anywhere in North America, depending on the American dollar, because that takes some swings sometimes. But and that's just come from doing my research and projecting so many trips to so many different places over time and learning, what was the swing in that trip. Keep the formatting simple. So you saw in the sample beforehand, it's like 7 columns, I guess, but try to keep it as clean as you can and not have too much noise in the background. I have seen some coaches pull up and say, well, this is my budget template, and they're struggling with it, and it's just numbers are everywhere. There's notes included all over the place, and you can't really follow it with your eyes. So the easiest sort of budgets that I've seen that have worked for people that they can refer back to and go, yeah, I'm either on budget or I'm not on budget, or have been very, very clean, and the formatting isn't complicated. So try your best to keep it as simple as you can. Excel is awesome for templates. There's lots of different budget templates you can find in Excel. Updating it as often as possible. So this is something that I've been helping even our national team coaches and people I know running national programs I've done some mentorship with, is updating that budget as often as possible and updating the actual expenses, because we all easily forget what something costs if it's not entered immediately. So keeping receipts in an envelope is great, but then making sure that you enter them and compare them to the original budget. So it's also great to set a budget, but if you're not tracking those actuals, you're not able to refer and learn back on your projections. So trying to make sure that you're entering those actuals as you go, and referring back to the budget and then making adjustments as you go. And that comes down to these fixed versus flexible expenses. So when putting together a large program budget, for example, or a big team budget, knowing what are your fixed expenses versus what's flexible, and then what you need to be able to change within that budget as the season goes along. So what that means is the fixed expenses might be your coaching fees. So you've contracted 4 coaches and you're going to pay them $3,000 each for the next couple months as kind of an honorarium. So that would be a fixed expense. You've promised those people that expense line in your budget cannot change. So you're looking at whatever. So what did I say? 4 coaches, 3. So you've got $12,000 that you've got set in your budget. Maybe under flexible, you've got some equipment that you are hoping to purchase, but is maybe not necessary for the team. So there's always things like that in the budget that could be flexible. So if we're running over budget in an area, so you go on a small trip, or someone says, oh, I'd really like to do this professional development opportunity, and you see that as more important than something else in the budget, knowing that certain things can be flexible, and there always needs to be identified things in the budget that can be flexible, so that if you get into a scenario where you're needing to find money to make sure that you're at net zero at the end of the year, that you know what is flexible. So if you look through your budget and everything's fixed, maybe you need a little bit of room in your budget, or we need to rework things to ensure that there is a little bit of flexibility, because things do change. Like I said, the dollar can swing, things can cost more than you thought. Maybe someone quoted you something and they forgot to add the tax, and then the bill comes in with tax added. Things can kind of go astray pretty quickly. And then, yeah, we've talked lots about the projected versus actuals and making sure that you have both of those in your budget. Does anyone have any questions on the budgeting kind of basics? You can just type it in the type box also, because I don't have the mics on. No? Okay. So we're going to talk quickly just about planning. Another big aspect of admin that we do as coaches. So I liked this. I actually loved this, especially if any of you guys use Excel for your coaching. I use it so much. I love this little cartoon. I wish that was how it worked. Oh, so that slide didn't work. Okay, sorry. We won't talk about that. That was just, no, it doesn't matter. Actually, I guess it does. So what it was a picture of a yearly training plan tool in Excel. And all I was going to say is the amount of planning that we have to do and the intensity of that planning. So any of you, I'm sure you've all seen a yearly training plan. There's so much detail that goes into them. There's an entire NCCP course called Performance Planning, and then there's Advanced Performance Planning that gets involved in it. So my question to the group is kind of how else can you plan your season as a coach? So if you're not a provincial coach or you're not running a year-long program or you're volunteering coaching for a couple weeks of the year at a club and you're not prepared to put together a complicated yearly training plan, you don't have anyone to help you do that, what are some other ways we can plan? And this was just a super simple example of how broad planning can be considered. So this was just from an event that I'd done that, this is still considered planning. So no, it's not a yearly training plan. It's not a document that's put together in Excel, but it still can be very effective depending on the situation. So as coaches, this is really an aspect of coaching, but it's also an aspect of administration. So, and it definitely takes us time in the office. So this was a version for my athletes at nationals to see the week. It was a fun way to do the calendar for the week. So at the top, I had each day and what the major thing was that day. So you'll see some of them. This was national championships. The whole day was just training, then qualifier semis, and so on. And then the bigger sticky note down in the right-hand corner was what was the detailed schedule for the day. So one was the wake-up time. We do a 12-pack, which is kind of like a short workout, warm up in the morning. When were they going to leave, so that they could really plan. They could plan their day. I could plan what we were doing, and everyone had it well communicated, like we talked about at the start. When was recovery being done? And they always wanted to know when recovery was being done so they could plan their free time at night. And then when was lights off time. And then the smaller little sticky notes on the bottom were their goals for the week. So we kept kind of switching these out, and it was nice because every day we would peel one off and they could visually see the week kind of ticking by. Does anyone else have any nice ideas that they've used or kind of neat things that have worked well that they've used for planning that wasn't our traditional yearly training plan tool? I think this is a neat area. We want to get better in this area. So yes, I'm a strong believer in the yearly training plan tool, but what are some other ways that we're able to plan with our athletes or plan for our programs? You guys can just type on in the chat box. I can see someone's typing Google Docs. Nice. Yep, Shannon, what sport are you with? Karate. Nice. Sweet. Perfect. Yeah, and we're using Google Docs a little bit actually in my own coaching. We just started sharing a Google Doc to track. Again, I'm a snowboard coach, so trampoline progression so that if you have coaches dipping in for different weeks, you knew what the group was doing. It's working really well. I like that one. Yeah, Google Docs for planning is great. Yeah, I like it that everyone can kind of share and see your plan. Be interesting to see if do any of you guys use your yearly training plan and share it on a Google Doc? Because that will be quite easy to do now. Good way to communicate to assistant coaches or head coaches. I don't know what your role is. A couple others are typing. So Vanessa just made a note. I'm old school and like writing down plans on paper. Vanessa, I am too, hence my handwritten schedule for nationals. Nice. Awesome. Yeah, so that's great. Old school still works. And again, that's a version of planning. It is administration and it's effective for you. So I see nothing wrong with that. And then Chris is saying, I've used Excel to produce a one-page calendar for parents athletes to plan for the competitions and time trials. Awesome, Chris. Yeah, that's really great. And you brought up a key point there is the communication on your planning and the calendaring to parents. is super, super important. So, and I also feel it's very important to let the athletes know what's coming up as well. You get more buy-in. Cool. Does anyone have any questions on planning? There's two entire NCCP planning courses. So although it's an aspect of administration, I'm not getting into it in detail tonight. Just gonna let you guys typing answer and then we'll move on. On the subject, though, if any of you are ever requiring help with your yearly training plan, I am available as a resource if needed. Okay, while Shannon's typing, I'm just going to open the next slide. The handy thing about using Google Docs is I've used links to videos. Oh, that's nice, Shannon. That is a really good thing, actually. Very cool. I'll have to look that up, check that out. So the next couple slides we're going to go through is just the awareness of athlete tracking, and I think it's an area of coaching administration that a lot of us kind of don't necessarily allot enough time for. I'll leave it that way. So it's pretty exciting to plan your season, and once you're in your season, to plan your sessions. That's pretty exciting. And communication, we know, has to happen. Budgeting and financing, we have to do those aspects. Athlete tracking, we have to do too, but some coaches that I've met are phenomenal at this, and they spend ample time doing athlete tracking. Whereas others, I have worked with a lot of coaches who sort of struggle in this area. So it's a thing I just wanted to go through a couple slides on, what could that look like? And I'd love to hear some feedback on this group on, how have you tracked your athlete progression and progress? So this first slide is this is what I pulled up. This is the I guess, minimum requirement for a comp dev level coach during their evaluation, and this is multi-sport. So any of you guys that have done comp dev or are doing comp dev in the future, this is what the CAC puts forward as what a coach has to show, the evidence-based reports that show athlete tracking. And you can see, I'm not going to have you read each one, just the great number of areas that are asked for coaches to track. So tracking all of these things, athlete general health status, nutrition, hydration, ability to manage stress, results, commitment, motivation, all of that takes time. And we sort of need a good way to do it that works for us and works for our athletes. So we'll definitely do some sharing over the next few slides. So this little sample here, I'll give my example first so that hopefully you guys feel open to share, but this was just an example of how I had found the best way for me personally as a coach to do some of my tracking. So I was tracking the different events. Those are just event names. And then the result is the placing, like the actual place in the field. So 73rd out of however many people were there. The score is the second column, and then the target score. So again, I'm coming from an individual scored sport. And then tracking, did an athlete meet the physical benchmark? Did they meet minimum technical guidelines that we had set? And then looking at an individual sport, it's interesting to look at percentage of field placing, which is the calculation of where they finished versus the where they finished within the entire field. So the first one, they did very poorly. They were 73rd, so that would have been 73rd out of a couple more people. They were in the second percentile, so they were very close to the bottom. Whereas in halfpipe nationals, this athlete was in the top 5% because they were at a 95%, and they were in second place. So just gives me a bit of an indication of where they are within the field. So what are some different ways that you guys have tracked or that we can track athlete performance? What have you found to be helpful? There's so many different ways it can be done now. And I'll share with you guys since I don't see anyone typing yet. But yeah, feel free to share with the group, please. So Google Docs has come up. Google Forms is one of the ways that we're preferring to do things within the Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic right now. So Scott Wilgris, who's one of our strength and conditioning coaches, has done a whole bunch of work using Google Forms. What I like about Google Forms is it's easy to create one. So if you guys haven't done this already, it's a great tool. You can easily create a form, and then you can set it up so that it automatically gets sent to your athletes. So you could do it once a week or twice a week, and you could say to your athletes, rate your hydration this week, 1 to 10. Rate your sleep this week. Rate your exertion at training this week. You could do whatever you wanted to track. Um, Maybe not the best for results tracking. I haven't used it for that, but as far as getting feedback from athletes on a number of areas that we saw on the last slide, and being able to track, how are my athletes feeling, how are they doing? Google Forms is pretty cool. It's free, it's easy to use. It works well on things like iPhones, iPads, and computers. And then the nice thing is it gets exported to Excel, coach's best friend, Excel. So we can all, have the Excel sheet and have all the data that we want. Have any of you guys used any other things that you've liked? Ways of tracking athlete performance, or other aspects of your athlete that you've liked? Sledding, Shannon. I started with G Fitness Test last year. First time that. Okay, great. So Shannon, it'd be interesting to hear. With a fitness test last year. So you started with a fitness test last year, like started your training season with a fitness test? And that's a great way to start the training season. And also there's lots of opinions we could talk about when that should happen. But that's great. It was the first time we did. I plan to do it twice this year. Nice, Shannon. That's excellent. Yeah. So and then the key will be working with whoever your sports science support is to figure out when the best times in the season to test are. And I know in my own experience through coaching, we did a lot of kind of moving the testing around to make sure that it was giving us the results that we wanted. So Miranda, keep on typing. Some of this testing we almost test sets within practice sessions. Yes, awesome. Yeah, perfect. So doing little short tests within practice sessions to make sure that the athlete is moving forward. That's perfect. Those are great. So some other things that I threw up just here tonight. There's numerous apps that are available on iPhone and Android that are tracking tools. I need to do some digging, and I can if this group is interested. We have someone in the office who's really good about keeping up on all the different apps. So I don't personally use them, but even if you go into the App Store and you start to search coach tracking tools, coach tools, there's so many. It seems like every day there's new ones, and I've heard really good things about some of them. Google Forms, like I said, for daily logs seems to be working quite well. Your coach diary is also, so for Vanessa, if you like paper and pen, keeping a coach diary or making notes on your session plans also will help you track athlete performance over time. And then editing your yearly training plan as you go along. That was just another example of skills tracking with athletes that I had done. So why do we track in performance? And hopefully you guys would all know this already, but it's really to make improvements, alter our programs, and to be accountable. So to both the athlete and the parents, and then also, as our programs get more professional, is to be able to report back to funders. Yes, and Shannon, you're totally right. So Shannon said in karate, the belt tests are a form of tracking and performance. Yeah, you guys have a great integrated system with the belts where you can see that progress and the actual athlete gets to see it, which is kind of really, it's great. It's many sports have badge programs or used to have badge programs, and they're very similar. So we talked a little bit about how do you track your athlete progress. And then I just wanted to have a quick chat on this subject because I think this is really important. So we chatted a little bit about how you track it. So maybe we're doing fitness tests, we're doing mini testing as we go towards our system. We're looking at, people moving up through their belts in karate. But how do you know when to make an intervention in a program? So how do you know that you're at the point where your athlete is not progressing or going through a few blocks in a row where they're not progressing and you're not seeing an improvement in performance or in any of the things you're trying to improve? Does anyone have any ideas? This is the important one, and I don't mean to put anyone on the spot. If anyone has any, throw them in. But this is a big question that we're asking within things like the Canadian Sports Center and at the Canadian Olympic level is, do our coaches know when to make that intervention? And it's an experienced coach that often, and one that has a good feel of the athlete that knows when to make that intervention. And these interventions, those are the important ones that can make a big difference in an athlete career. So if we don't notice that someone's not progressing for a long time, that can have a big effect on the athlete over the long term. So Kathy says, an athlete not satisfied with own performance. Yeah, okay. So you're seeing that the athlete themselves are sort of dissatisfied with how they're progressing, either technically or whatever their performance is. Yep, definitely. So you're getting the feedback from the athlete. Yep. And that works well, especially with older athletes. I think they know sometimes when they're not doing well. Athlete takes a dip in commitment or interest. That's an interesting one, Miranda. I like that. Yeah. So being really in tune with the person that is your athlete and seeing that their interest is dipping. I like that. Yeah, Vanessa. Yeah, I like that. That's not one that normally comes up. I really enjoyed that comment. Good. A couple others coming in. So intervention, I mean, is do you make a change to the program? So you've got an athlete who's not progressing, they're not getting any better. And this could be any level of athlete. So an athlete trying to go to the Olympics, or a club athlete that just comes to a program once a week and you're just not seeing them make any improvements. So what do you do to intervene and either say something or do some more digging or see what's happening? Maybe it's a change to the program. Maybe it's a conversation with the athlete to see what's going on. Is there something outside of your program that's happening? Like, how do you know when to make any one of those interventions? I'm sure as coaches, many of us know the types of interventions we could make, but so Shannon, that's an interesting one. You may not have the resources to make change. Yeah, that is true. So in some situations, maybe you see that an athlete is not progressing. So I guess maybe tell me if this example would be good. So you see an athlete is not progressing in, Shannon, you said you were swimming, right? Um, actually don't know a good swim example. I'll use a good snowboard one. So our athletes go off large jumps, but if we're seeing that they're not progressing off the small jumps that we have in Atlantic Canada, sometimes my intervention is I have to get them to larger jumps. And if we don't have the financial resources to get them to those jumps, then I might be in a little bit, I have to be very creative. I may not have the resources to make that change. Is that decent for what you were considering, Shannon? And then, yeah, Vanessa, change in attitude. That can definitely show, similar to the comment above, that maybe the athlete is picking up on their own lack of progression. William said, if you're involved with mentoring program, another set of eyes and ideas. Yeah, William, that's a great one. Yep. I'll let you guys keep typing. So yeah, sorry, Shannon. Yeah, sometimes more training time. Yeah, totally. So Shannon says, yeah, sometimes more training time, but if you can't book the facilities, you may not be able to provide them with the time they need. Very, very common. I just finished driving around Nova Scotia talking to different club coaches, and facility access came up a lot. So I think that's actually a very, very, very common problem at many, many, many levels of sport around here, like around in Canada, really. So basically what I like, this is really great, you guys. So how do you know when to make an intervention? You guys nailed it. So it's getting to know your athletes really, really well. It's getting to know your assistant coaches and other coaches you work with, like William said. So get talking to those other sets of eyes and those other ideas and saying, are you noticing a change? Have you noticed a progression in this person? But then also coming back to that athlete tracking. So part of the goal of your athlete tracking should be for it to show you when to make that intervention. So, we don't want you guys as coaches to spend all this time tracking sleep if tracking sleep isn't showing you when the athlete is tired or not, or when to make an intervention. So if you're tracking sleep and not doing anything with it, you're wasting your time. And it's a lot of your time that you're looking at, numbers or making the athletes respond, and then it's not being used. Whereas an effective use would be, I'm looking at sleep, I'm noticing a period of 5-hour sleep nights, and then I'm noticing that an athlete is tired in the gym, then I'm able to back up my intervention. I'm able to go to that athlete and say, to make an intervention and say, listen, I'm noticing you're only sleeping 5 hours a night and you're not progressing, or I'm noticing not as much effort being put in the gym, or even maybe I'm noticing you're not as interested as you used to be. And then that's the intervention. But you know about that intervention because of the athlete tracking that you've done. And the same thing, I'll show you a quick little slide. Oh, I took it out. Why did I take it out? Sorry, you guys, I was fiddling around with my slides today and I took out my good intervention slide. Um, but it basically just showed that you can chart this as well. So even with performance results like percentage of field placings, you can actually track over time. And the best is when you track over years. If you're working with anything above like a club level athlete, you can track their progression in the same amount level of event over a long period of time and show when they're having that dip in performance, and then you're able to make those interventions as you go through. Christopher, I'm working on skills to try psychological interventions. Sometimes it's a mindset issue, building that grit. Yep, and that is one that, yeah, that's we need to get some more support on here for you guys, and then I'm open to feedback on what you want to hear from in that area, just on changing mindsets, resetting mindsets, and building grit. That's a great point, Christopher. So, unfortunately, in the interest of time, I did have a couple things I wanted to go through with management. But I'm not gonna get into all of it. So, basically, management in a summary, you guys are actually. Let's show this last slide. Job of a coach is managing people and cultivating an environment. So coaching is like being a CEO. And I really think if you guys think that with your team management, then you'll be successful in building your team, so that you are your own little CEO as a coach, or your own big CEO, depending on what level or what you're coaching or how many people you're coaching. Um, and that was by Dr. Gordon Bloom, who was here this year. There's just so much management that a coach has to do. Um, I'm going to skip through this again because of time, but we can talk about it another time. So what I wanted to do is open up the last couple minutes for any questions. So if you guys could type your questions in the type box. And then what I wanted to wrap up with as well was just, I will be sending out, you guys are the very first Canadian Sports Centre Atlanta coach webinar. So I will be sending out a feedback form. It's through Google Forms, in fact. So if you haven't done one, you'll get to soon. Just to hear a little bit about how the webinar worked for you, how was the process of even logging in and that sort of thing, so we can make sure that the next webinars are better than our first. A big important thing that I want to hear from is feedback on webinar topics. So again, we've been with the first round, we're sort of taking what we've heard from the Atlanta Coaching Conference, and we're also taking what we just heard from our Cross Nova Scotia tour. But we've got coaches that are attending these webinars from all over Atlantic Canada. So I want to know what other subjects you'd like to hear from. Who would you like to hear from? Even if there's specific people in Canada or the United States, we can get people on these webinars. That's the cool thing about these webinars. And then just as sort of an administrative note, you can see up on the screen the next webinar. These are both in the locker already. So if you need to register, you go in and they'll read the locker exactly how you registered for tonight. Click these two. For any of you that are from, I know we had a lot from PEI and Newfoundland that were planning to attend tonight. If you're from those two provinces, currently you have to search under Nova Scotia in the locker to find any of the webinars. I may try to find a way to list them in all the provinces, but it's a little complicated. So just always go to Nova Scotia and you'll see the webinars. November 9th is being run by Paul Tingley. Paul is a 3-time Paralympic sailing athlete, and he is our para coordinator here with Sport Nova Scotia. And his topic is athletes with a disability. So he is going to be talking to the group about kind of misconceptions within that world, and fears that people have within coaching athletes with a disability. So for any of you guys that have your sports, that have any sort of para component or whatnot, that'll be a really great webinar, and Paul's very excited for it. So that's November 9th. December 7th is an athlete wellness webinar, and that's with Megan in New Brunswick, and she is the game plan coordinator for all of Atlantic Canada. Game Plan is a national program around athlete wellness, and she's going to be talking a little bit about that, but mostly just talking